Hey, it's Chris Brower. On today's show, we're actually super excited. We've got a guest with us, the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Cody Smith, who is a personal trainer. So if you've got goals for the new year to get in shape, you're definitely going to want to stick around and watch this video to the end. Cody's got some great tips for us that we're going to share with you. So, Cody, we appreciate you having on the show. First of all, maybe just give, so everybody can know here, kind of your background and why they should listen to you as a professional.
Oh man, I try not to play that card a lot. Like, hey, I'm the professional. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, I've been working with people in fitness since 2008. It's all I've ever done since really had another career. In terms of since I've started. Before I obviously, dabbled in other things, but since 2008, fitness is all I've done. It's all I've known. In various aspects too. From working in commercial gyms to doing my own thing on a couple occasions, and and I'm doing the remote thing now. And honestly, it's been the best in terms of obviously for myself, but for clients as well.
Yeah, no, and I just, so people are aware of too, a little disclaimer, I do use Cody and do the remote training stuff. And so far it's been super awesome for me that, I don't have to try and get into a gym. You work with the equipment that I have here at my house, and it's nice that I don't have to worry about all the COVID stuff and everything happening. I can just do my thing here.
Totally. I think, especially since COVID, it's my guess that the home gym is going to be the gym of the future, really, or at least, it's going to take away from some of that market, and a lot of people are going to work out at home from now on.
A couple questions then that we do have for you, right? So people starting the new year, they're going to want to get into the fitness journey, right? Everybody seems to have the New Year's resolutions to lose weight. So what would you say for somebody that's like, hey, I want to set some goals for the new year? I've seen on your Instagram, we've talked about this a little bit, right? That you talk a lot about not setting necessarily weight goals. So how would you recommend people set their New Year's goals?
Especially for the New Year's crowd, like weight loss is typically the main driver and motivator. And there's a few problems with that. One being, and I think I just posted about this, but most people just have like some arbitrary number. Maybe they weighed that before. They're like, well, that's a good weight. But, not everyone who weighs the same looks the same. And I talk about that a lot. I actually posted an infographic, and it was like 7 or 8 different women, various, body shapes and sizes and heights and all that stuff. And they all weighed the same, right? Yeah. So, it's a good place to start. But a lot of times, especially when you do it right, quote unquote, right? And, typically focus on the long term, and you introduce strength training, and you don't focus just on like the number of the scale, you'll find that the number you had in mind doesn't really match up to like your sweet spot, or where you feel the best, where you feel like you look the best. A lot of times we overestimate the amount of weight we need to lose, because weight loss and fat loss aren't necessarily the same thing, right? Yeah. If you want to lose a lot of weight, as dumb as it sounds, just don't eat anything and do a ton of cardio. and you'll lose a lot of weight. But then I tell that to people, like, well, yeah, I don't want that. So, there's a lot of other things to focus on. The scales, it's great. It's good data to have. It's good data to keep track of, but it shouldn't be like the only thing, right? So I would suggest focusing on, for one, changing your body composition. So trying to lose fat, but trying to at least keep the muscle you have, but ideally you build some, because that's going to help you in the long-term fat loss anyways, right? So building some muscle, focus on how you feel, focus on like how you feel when you work out, and are you improving with movements, right? Because strength is still a skill at the same time. So are you getting better with things? Do your clothes fit differently? Do you feel differently? Do you feel more energized? Do you look in the mirror and think, wow, I like what's happening? And a lot of times, if the answer to those questions is yes, sometimes the reflection of what the actual weight loss shows you is not as accurate as you would have thought, right? It's like, oh, well, I've lost a couple inches and I feel so much better, but I've only lost 3 pounds. It's like, how does that work? Well, that goes to show that weight loss and fat loss aren't necessarily the same thing.
Okay. So with that then, with people that want to see the fat loss, people that want to be able to look in the mirror, say, hey, I like the way I'm looking. They like that their clothes fit better or whatever it is, right? They want to see the progress. They like that. How often do you recommend somebody works out or does strength training to see those kind of results?
Yeah, so, well, for the most part, like the majority of people say like their training age is 0 or they've never done it, or maybe kind of in the past they've lifted weights a little bit. Honestly, I think 3 days is a really good dose, and it's not like something that you have to dedicate your entire life to. Like, it's not a full-blown overhaul. 3 days is perfect, especially from like a macro perspective. The problem with like the body part split and all that stuff is most people can't, or are unwilling, whatever the reason, they can't dedicate 5 or 6 days a week, right?
Yeah.
So I'm a big fan of like a 3-day like total body split for a lot of people, because eventually you're going to get to some moments in your life where you're not as consistent at the gym, and you can't dedicate as much time. And so it's like, if you hit your 3 days, you've pretty much covered your bases. And it's shown to have some of the most like positive improvement to body comp change and all of the other things that go along with strength training, fat loss, when 3 days is kind of the sweet spot, really, is what I found too. I mean, if you have more days you can dedicate to it, great. But for the most part, especially the New Year's crowd, going from like 0 to 100 and trying to hit the gym 5 or 6 days a week generally isn't the greatest approach. So start with 3 days or so, even 2 really, but I'd say 2 to 3 days is kind of a good place to start at least. And then from there, as you get consistent and you adapt and all of those things, then you can take it to the next level and do more than 3 days. But I'd say 2 to 3 days is a great starting point.
Okay. And you've got the hashtag anti-dad-bod coalition, which I love. It's awesome. Lots of cool things there. I'm sure a common question that we're going to have for people, who watch this, I know the answer, but do you only work with men? Do you work with men and women? And the follow-up to that is, a lot of women struggle, I think, with the idea that if they do a lot of strength training, which immediately in their mind they think lifting weights, they're going to bulk, right? So maybe elaborate on that for us a little bit.
Yeah. So I don't just work with males. I have several females. I would say for the most part, the majority of my roster is males, but I do have quite a bit of females. So yeah, to answer that question, sure, women, of course. I want to help as many people as I can, so it doesn't matter, in that regard. Yeah, with weightlifting, that's like, oh man, that's something I've battled in, for 13 years or whatever. Is I don't want to get bulky. Mm-hmm. Like, don't worry, you probably couldn't if you tried, right? And I've never seen a female especially like accidentally put on too much muscle, right? Yeah. It just doesn't happen. And that's kind of been, I don't know if it's just the fitness space in general and how they market towards females, but in reality, like, the prescription for male and female is pretty close to the same thing, right? When it boils down to the basic principles. In short, there's an analogy I've heard and I've posted it. It's like, being afraid of lifting weights because you think you're going to get bulky is like being afraid to drive your car because you think you're going to turn into a race car driver, basically. Right? Like, it just doesn't happen that way. Especially if you do it in a structured way, and your nutrition is somewhat correlating with how you're training. I've never seen that, to be honest with you. And not to say it's impossible, because there are certainly outliers, but to all the ladies listening to this, don't be afraid to lift some weights. And I don't mean like the colored dumbbells you see in the body pump room. I mean like some actual weights. Like, don't be afraid. Yeah. And it's really empowering, right? Like, especially for females, when they realize that all of the notions that they had before in regards to weightlifting aren't really true, and they notice themselves getting stronger and their body's looking different, adding some curves or whatever it is. I've seen a lot of females fall in love with strength training.
Yeah. Well, and I think you hit on a good point there as well, that, it doesn't happen by accident. Like if you want to bulk, you have to be looking at that. And that's one thing too, where like a professional really comes into hand, because I mean, if you just went to the gym and you started like bench pressing and, bicep curls and all this stuff, just doing what you saw other people doing, then maybe your chances of that happening increase slightly. But with you, and what I loved about you was right from the get-go, it was you asking, well, what are your goals? What are you trying to accomplish? How are we going to best help you? How am I going to serve you? Right. And so if any women are concerned about that, that's where having a professional giving you the training, so you know exactly what to do every morning when you wake up, you don't have to worry about that.
Definitely. And, along the lines of like what I want someone to do, I generally try to add a why in there, right? And so there is some education. It's not just like a dictatorship where I'm like, here's what you're doing, like don't question it. And a lot of, I look at it as more of a collaboration too. So it's, I'll always run things by like you, Chris, yourself, or any client I work with. It's like, well, what do you think about this? Or, and try to just have the conversation. So there's a lot of communication involved. And, I try not to guess on anything, in terms of where we're going. So that, try to have the roadmap like in front of us and stick to it as closely as possible. Obviously, there's always going to be some bumps in the road, as you are well aware of.
Yep.
But the most important thing is that you just, you get back to it as soon as you can.
Yeah. And another thing I appreciate about, your strategy and the way that you approach fitness and nutrition as a whole is, I feel like other things that I've tried, because I've tried all sorts of stuff, right? Like, and everything else that I've tried, I feel like when I'm not perfect at it, or when I don't do it exactly how they say, I feel like, oh crap, I failed. I got to start all over, and I think even, I know it's a big time fad right now, like the 75 hard challenge. Like, I feel like that's one of them that you're like, oh, I failed. I got to start all over. And that mindset of I failed keeps you from starting a ton of times. You're just like, oh, I give up. I'm not doing this anymore.
Yeah. Things like that. It's just so cyclical. It's the all or nothing. And that's something I talk about ad nauseum. And the whole 75 hard thing, like, I think the guy who created it's awesome. Like, I love a lot of, his outlook on a lot of things, but it's clear that he's never coached a human in terms of fitness.
Yeah.
Right. Like business and stuff. Sure. Like, I agree with a lot of the stuff that Andy puts out, but with 75 hard in particular, like for most people, I would encourage them not to try that. Right. Yeah. And like, it's you break the word to yourself. So you're like, I'm gung ho, I'm motivated. And when we're motivated, we make these decisions while we're motivated that we don't think are really going to change when we're not motivated anymore. Right. Mm-hmm. So trying not to avoid these traps essentially that you fall into when you're super motivated, because you're not always going to feel that way. And one day, like, you're going to mess up on 75 hard. And with that in particular, you have to start all over.
Yeah.
Right? You start from day one. So for most people, I'm just like, just stay away from that, especially if it's someone I have a rapport with. I know, what they've tried before. And it's like, that's the last thing you should try. Right. There's an appreciation to like the discipline and the things that go into it. Like, I get all of that. But for most people in terms of fitness, that's not the approach that they should be taking.
Yeah.
It's more of a build up to it type of thing.
And even the people that I've seen that have done it, that have taken the challenge and completed the challenge and done really good at it, once the challenge is over, they put the weight right back on.
Then what? You know what I mean? You're going to do that forever? Probably not. And that's kind of what it boils down to, is like, when you're on this fitness journey, whatever, as cliche as that sounds, like, whatever you're doing, like, can you do that for a long time, like the rest of your life? If the answer is no, unless you get paid for what your body looks like or what it can do, or you're in, a weight class sport or something like uber specific, if the answer is no to that question, then there's no reason to even do it.
Yeah.
You're just going to end up stopping and then starting all over again.
Yeah. Question that we had a lot of people tell us that they want to know from trainers is, basically we had a lot of questions come in centered around the idea of supplements. When should you be taking supplements? What supplements do you recommend? All of those things. And I know you do have an opinion on this. And so would you mind sharing that?
Well, yeah, so I'm not a huge supplement guy, honestly, as you know that, some of the basics, of course, but it's a supplement, like it's called a supplement for a reason. It's just a supplement what you're already doing. And a lot of times people rely too much on supplementation, right? They think, their sleep's crap, their nutrition's crap, their training is not very consistent, but they are worried about like what pre-workout's the best and what fat burner they should take. It's like once it's like you have to earn that type of complexity, right? And there's supplements I would recommend to anybody, vitamin D, some fish oil, some things along that line. But in terms of like the other types of supplementation, like fat burners and pre-workouts and whey proteins, and the protein thing, it's like whatever you can handle digestively, then sure, go ahead. It's good for convenience, but for the most part, I don't even get into that conversation very often, as you are well aware of. It's, I think a protein powder is great, especially for the convenience, because hitting protein targets for a lot of people is very difficult. So protein powder, like I said, some fish oil, and then, some creatine too. I think creatine's great. Everyone should take it no matter who you are. There's been a lot, that's like the most studied supplement on the planet. And there's really no downside to taking creatine. And there's a lot of like myths surrounding creatine that are not necessarily true. But yeah, so supplements, I guess, and it is highly relative to the person too as well. And I try not to prescribe like specific things, especially when it comes to like medical conditions or things of that nature, because that's not in my scope at all. But just the very basics is what I generally recommend, and then just kind of not even get into the other stuff.
Yeah. So going on creatine, talking about that, people taking that, when would you take it? Before or after workout, right?
The timing doesn't really matter. You'd want to take it every day, so do it consistently. And that's kind of the hard part for people, because they'll take it with like their protein shake or something. And if you're not training every day, then you're going to miss a bunch of days. So remember to take your creatine. And then kind of the rule of thumb is like 3 to 5 grams a day, basically, is what you'd want with that. Some people load it, like they do a ton for a week or two and then kind of taper it. I've never really been a fan of that. And it can affect some people's digestion. So if that's something that you kind of want to, see for yourself and experiment with it, and start with maybe the lower end, and then, see how you feel and increase it if you want after that.
Moving a little bit from the gym into the kitchen now, what would you mind sharing then with the people watching, what kind of you base your nutrition around and what you coach around nutrition? Yeah,
so that's another thing that's obviously very relative, but for the most part, I just stick with like the basic principles. If someone shows that they can do this consistently, then it's like, if there's a desire from there to get a lot more detail, we can always do that. But over the course of my career, I've always made the mistake of adding too much complexity before it's been earned, essentially. So with nutrition, honestly, it's really simple. Consume enough protein, right? And the easiest way to do that is to spread it out throughout the day and make sure you have protein with every meal. Obviously, depending on the person, the amount will be different, but that principle still remains the same across the board. And then get a variety of color in. So fruits and vegetables, obviously for the micronutrient content and the fiber, and from more of an overall health perspective, with the fruit and vegetables. And then stay hydrated. Really, like it's 3 simple rules in my experience and opinion, and those are pretty much it. And then from there, obviously, there's nuance and more context needed, but for the sake of being pretty general, that's it.
So for people who want to take that next step, Cody, and really dive into this, get off to a good start with the new year, and something that they can maintain for the rest of their lives, not just a fad diet, not a fad thing for exercise. What's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Honestly, just reach out to me on Instagram or Facebook and just message me. I'm not the most techie guy. I don't have, a fancy website or a funnel that you go fill out a form and apply for coaching. It's just, you can message me or, and then we'll hop on a phone call. That's kind of how it works, get going through the DMs, and then I'll give you a call and we'll kind of see what's the best route. And if it's even a good fit, really, if I can provide what you're looking for, then we'll try to move forward from there. But, there are times where I'll have these conversations and it's just, you can tell kind of up front that it's probably not a good match, if you will.
Okay. What would you, and then for people that do get onto your Instagram page, take a look at that, they decide they want to sign up, like we talked about, you will work with people based on what they have. But if they really want to take this seriously, what would you say is like the bare minimum equipment that they should get if they're doing a home gym setup?
Yeah. So assuming they're working at home, I've had long-term clients that I've worked with that only have a set of dumbbells. We can work with that, right? So I would say that would probably be like the minimal stuff. Obviously, the more the better. Like you have a pretty sweet setup with this rack and the bench and the barbell and all that. So the more the better. But really, technically, you don't really need anything. We could get by with zero equipment and just get as creative as possible. But I would say a set of dumbbells and maybe even a suspension trainer like a TRX or, the straps that hang. That's always a good call too. Pretty versatile. So.
Okay. Well, yeah, we appreciate your time, Cody, sharing your wisdom with us. Like you said, we'll post your Instagram handle on here so people can hit you up on there, DM you if they have other questions. But really appreciate your time today.
Right on, man. Appreciate you.